Most alien empires believe humans were dangerous, not because they were the strongest, not because they had the biggest fleets, but because humans did something no other species in the galaxy truly understood. They remembered small things. And sometimes, those small things changed everything. On the far edge of the Hastrung system, inside the quiet workshop of Newtown, Wyatt Staples stood alone over a wooden table. In front of him rested a strange piece of wood. It wasn't rare. It wasn't expensive. In fact, most people would have thrown it away. The timber had come from the stump of a burned tree on Wyatt's barren land. After the orbital bombardment, hundreds of trees had been destroyed. Most of the wood had been cut down and recycled into construction materials. This particular piece had almost been turned into sawdust for shipping crates. Almost. But someone sorting the scrap pile had noticed the unusual grain pattern twisting through the wood like frozen flames. Instead of destroying it, they saved it. Later, Marcus found the piece and quietly set it aside, and days later, when Wyatt went looking for wood to mount a fragment of Drazen wreckage, that same piece was waiting for him. Some would call that coincidence. Humans called it timing. A carpenter in Newtown helped shape the timber into a smooth board that would naturally form an oval shape, its surface marked with deep swirling burl patterns created by the roots of the tree. When it was finished, the plaque measured about 35 centimeters long, 8 centimeters wide, and nearly 4 centimeters thick. Simple. But beautiful. Wyatt placed the fragment of the destroyed Drazen warship onto the left side of the plaque. The twisted black metal looked almost alive against the warm brown wood. He traced its outline with a pencil, then he reached for his carving tools. Those tools had a story too. 2 weeks earlier, Wyatt had been wandering through the engineering decks searching for help. There he met a quiet Yikanti technician named Feshek. When Wyatt explained what he needed, she simply bowed slightly and said, "Please, sir, we owe you many favors. Leave them with me. I will return them tomorrow." Wyatt had expected a simple cleaning. Instead, he received works of art. Each blade had been polished to a mirror shine. Each edge sharpened until it could shave hair. And the handles. The handles were something else entirely. The old worn wooden grips had been replaced with carefully prepared Drazen claws. Polished. Shaped. Balanced. Each one fit Wyatt's hand perfectly. It was as if the tools had always been meant for him. Before carving anything permanent, Wyatt wrote the message on a scrap of paper. Then he checked the wording with Princess Clara. Noble etiquette in the galaxy could be complicated. Clara read the message. Smiled. And approved it. Only then did Wyatt begin carving, letter by letter. Line by line. Every stroke of the blade cut carefully into the wood. He worked slowly, sometimes during breaks. Sometimes late at night. Sometimes in the early morning before his duties began. Hours passed, then days, but Wyatt refused to rush. Every letter had to be perfect. Every line had to match, because this wasn't just a decoration. This was recognition. When the carving was finished, Feshek helped again. She scanned the fragment of Drazen wreckage and used engineering tools to machine a perfectly shaped recess into the wood. The metal fragment slid into place like it had always belonged there. She secured it with hidden bolts and added mounting brackets on the back so the plaque could hang on a wall. Finally, Wyatt polished the entire piece with wax until the surface shined softly under the lights. He stepped back. And read the inscription. To Estanil Ferentes. "You could have run, but you stayed. Battle of Hastrung Fander. Year for 156. At the bottom, just one word. Wyatt. Nothing more. The fleet would be leaving the Hastrung system tomorrow. So the time had come. Wyatt placed the plaque inside a protective box and headed to the Noir Navio shuttle bay. He signed out a shuttle and launched toward the orbital station known as the Eternal Garden. Both Princess Clara and Commander Redford knew what he was doing. They had approved it, even if they didn't completely understand why it mattered so much to him. When Wyatt arrived at the Eternal Garden, he immediately noticed something different. The station was changing. House Ferentes had already begun rebuilding. New lights illuminated the hangar. Fresh paint covered the scarred walls. Workers moved through the corridors carrying equipment and supplies. For the first time since the battle, the station looked alive again. A servant stood waiting beside Wyatt's shuttle. "Lord Staples," the man said respectfully. Lord Astanel has asked me to escort you to his office. Wyatt winced slightly at the title, but he nodded. Lead the way. As they walked through the corridors, Wyatt noticed something important. The shadows were gone. Brighter lighting had replaced the dark corners. There were no places left where a Drazen assassin could hide. House Ferentes had learned from the battle. Finally, the servant opened a large door. Wyatt stepped inside. Astanel's office had been completely rebuilt. Elegant furniture, decorated walls, polished floors, everything looked worthy of a noble house, but one wall stood out. It was made entirely of thick transparent glass. Behind it, a section of the destroyed Drazen warship had been preserved. Astanel noticed Wyatt looking. This, the young noble said quietly, was the room where my helmet failed. He stared at the black wreckage. I wanted a reminder, so I never forget what the Drazen tried to do to us. Wyatt nodded slowly. Then he spoke. My lord. Astanel raised a hand. Astanel, please. He smiled slightly. And I believe you prefer Wyatt. Wyatt returned the smile. Yes, I do. Then Wyatt placed the box on the table. I brought you something. Astanel looked curious. Wyatt opened the box and carefully lifted out the plaque. I didn't think it was right. Wyatt said calmly that you stayed aboard the Noir Navio during the battle and received no recognition for it. He placed the plaque on the table. Even if it's unofficial, you deserved something. Astanel stared at it. The wood, the carving, the piece of Drazen wreckage mounted into the board. He picked it up slowly. Who made this? He asked quietly. Wyatt shrugged. A carpenter prepared the wood. I carved the inscription, and a Yikanti engineer helped mount the wreckage. Then he added softly. The wood came from one of the trees burned during the orbital bombardment. He tapped the plaque lightly. I thought the symbolism mattered. For a moment, Astanel said nothing. His eyes filled with moisture. He blinked quickly and looked away. Wyatt pretended not to notice. Finally, Astanel spoke. I will treasure this. And in that quiet moment, something powerful happened, because in a galaxy filled with empires, fleets, and wars, a human had done something no one else had thought to do. He remembered. And that was why the galaxy would one day learn to fear humanity. Not for their weapons, but for their loyalty.
Wyatt stood alone in the workshop, carefully finishing the final touches on something special. In front of him sat a wooden plaque. At first glance, it looked simple, but the story behind it was anything but. The wood itself came from the stump of a burnt tree on his barren land. Originally, it had been thrown into a pile of scrap wood meant to be ground into sawdust for shipping boxes. But someone had noticed the strange and beautiful pattern inside the timber and decided it might be useful for something better. Marcus had seen it later that day and quietly set it aside, and when Wyatt came looking for a piece of timber to mount a fragment of the destroyed Drazen warship, the wood was waiting for him. A carpenter in Newtown had turned the rough chunk into a smooth oval board. The natural burrow patterns from the roots twisted through the wood like frozen flames. After careful shaping and planing, the board measured roughly 35 centimeters wide, 8 centimeters long, and just under 4 centimeters thick. It was perfect. Wyatt placed the broken fragment of the Drazen vessel on the left side of the plaque and traced its outline with a pencil. Then he reached for his carving tools. Those tools had a story of their own. 2 weeks earlier, while searching for help in the engineering spaces, Wyatt had met a quiet Yikanti technician named Fishik. When he explained what he wanted to do, she simply nodded and said, Please, sir, we owe you many favors. Leave them with me. I will return them tomorrow. And she had. When Wyatt received them back, he was stunned. Every blade had been cleaned and polished to a mere shine. The edges were razor sharp. Fishik had even included a strop and polishing compound to keep them perfect. But it was the handles that made Wyatt smile. The old wooden grips had been Replaced was carefully shaped dragon claws. Each claw had been polished and fitted perfectly to the tool. They fit Wyatt's hands like they had been made specifically for him, which, of course, they had, was steady hands. Wyatt wrote the words of the inscription on the plaque first. He had checked the wording was Clara to make sure it would be appropriate. Then he began carving each letter, one by one. Slowly, carefully, hours passed. He worked between his official duties, returning again and again to carve another letter. Then another. Every line had to match. Every curve had to be perfect. By the time he finished, Wyatt knew something. This was the most precise carving he had ever done. When the lettering was complete, Fishik helped once again. She scanned the fragment of dragon wreckage and machined it perfectly. Shaped recesses into the plaque so the metal could sit flush with the wood. Then she secured it with hidden bolts. She even installed mounting brackets on the back so the plaque could hang on a wall. Finally, Wyatt polished the wood with wax until it shone softly in the light. He stepped back and read the inscription one last time. To Istino Ferentes. You could have run, but you stayed instead. Battle of Hastrung Fander 1st 4156. The bottom was a simple signature. Wyatt. Nothing elaborate, nothing dramatic, just his name. Tomorrow, the fleet would leave the Hastrung system, which meant there was no more time to wait. It was time to deliver the gift. Wyatt packed the plaque carefully into a box and headed to the Noir Navio shuttle bay. He signed out a shuttle and left it off toward the Eternal Garden. Both Clara and Redford already knew what he was doing. They had approved, even if they didn't completely understand his reasoning. When Wyatt landed at the Eternal Garden, he noticed something immediately. Things had changed. House Ferentes had begun rebuilding. New lighting illuminated the hangar. Fresh paint brightened the walls. The entire place felt less like a battlefield and more like a home again. A servant was waiting beside the landing pad. Lord Staples, the man said respectfully. Lord Istanil asked me to escort you to his office. Wyatt winced slightly at the title but hid it well. Of course, he replied calmly. Please lead the way. As they walked through the corridors, Wyatt noticed another difference. The darkness was gone. The halls were brighter now, wider, safer. There were no shadows left for a dragon to hide in. Finally, they reached Istanil's office. Wyatt stepped inside and immediately noticed the transformation. The room had been rebuilt into something worthy of a noble lord. Fine furniture, elegant wall coverings, polished floors. But one wall was different. It was made of thick transparent glass. Behind it sat a preserved section of the destroyed dragon warship. Istanil stood up as Wyatt entered, noticing where Wyatt was looking. He spoke quietly. This is the room where my helmet failed. He looked at the wreckage behind the glass. I wanted a reminder. Something to make sure I never forget what the dragon intended for us. Wyatt opened his mouth. My lord. Istanil raised a hand gently. Istanil, please. Then he smiled slightly. And I believe you prefer Wyatt. Wyatt nodded. Yes, I do. Thank you. Istanil gestured toward the table. So, Wyatt, what brings you here today? Wyatt chuckled softly. Actually, I brought you a gift. He placed the box on the table and opened it. Inside was a plaque. I didn't think it was right, Wyatt continued, that you stayed aboard the Noir Navio during the battle, and received no recognition for it. Even if this is unofficial, I felt you deserved something. Estonel carefully lifted the plaque from the box. He studied the carving, the wood, the mounted piece of brazen wreckage. His eyes widened slightly. Who made this? He asked quietly. It's incredible. Wyatt shrugged. A bit of teamwork. A carpenter prepared the wood. I carved the text, and a Ye Conti engineer mounted the wreckage. He paused. Oh, and the wood itself came from a tree burned during the orbital bombardment. Wyatt looked at the plaque. I thought the symbolism mattered for a moment. Estonel said nothing. His eyes watered slightly. Then he blinked and looked away, pretending to examine the plaque again. Wyatt pretended not to notice. Finally, Estonel spoke. I will treasure this. And for a brief moment, the room fell silent.